In the blood-soaked history of the Roman Empire, some stories are so cruel, so strange, they feel like they must be fiction. But this one isn't. This is a true story that blurs the line between historical fact and psychological horror. It is about a person who was systematically broken down and rebuilt just to satisfy a madman's fantasy. It's the story of an emperor whose grief twisted into a monstrous obsession, and the young boy who became its unwilling victim. This is the grim account of Sporus, the boy forced to become the living ghost of a dead empress, the wife his own master may have murdered. Imagine being forced to throw away your identity, your name, your past, and even your own body, all carved away and replaced. Imagine being brutally altered, not for a crime, but to better resemble a dead woman you've never even met. This was the waking nightmare for Sporus, a youth in Emperor Nero's court who was snatched from his life and thrown into a world of horror. His story isn't just about abuse, it's about the complete theft of an identity, a psychological and surgical transformation that shows what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of a grieving, unstable emperor. This is the story of Nero's living doll, the emperor's madness. To understand the tragedy of Sporus, you first have to understand the man who orchestrated it, Emperor Nero. When he took the throne in 54 AD, he was just a teenager filled with promise. For a while, guided by his tutor Seneca, Nero was seen as the usher of a new golden age. He loved art, culture, and spectacle. But under the surface of the poet prince was a volatile and dangerous man, defined by vanity, paranoia, and a terrifying streak of cruelty. One by one, anyone who held him in check was eliminated. His stepbrother Britannicus died under very suspicious circumstances. His own mother, Agrippina the Younger, who had fought ruthlessly to put him on the throne, was murdered on his orders when he got tired of her meddling. But the person at the center of the drama that would swallow Sporus was Nero's second wife, Poppaea Sabina. Ancient historians describe her as breathtakingly beautiful and fiercely ambitious. She had completely captivated Nero. For her, he cast aside his first wife and defied Rome's elite. Their relationship was intense, passionate, and codependent. When she died in the summer of 65 AD, the circumstances were murky. The historian Tacitus says Nero kicked her in a fit of rage while she was pregnant. Suetonius tells a similar, brutal story. Other sources suggest she may have simply died from complications during her pregnancy. Whatever the cause, Nero was shattered. His grief was explosive and theatrical. He gave her eulogy himself, had her body embalmed instead of cremated, and burned a year's worth of Arabia's incense at her funeral. He even declared her a goddess. In public, he was the grieving husband, but his mind was spiraling. In the silence of the haunted imperial court, a new, sinister obsession began to grow. Nero didn't just want to mourn his wife, he wanted her back, and he thought he'd found a way. The uncanny resemblance. In the sprawling palace, surrounded by servants and slaves, there was a youth named Sporus. We don't know much about his early life, other than he was likely a poor delicatus, a slave boy chosen by a master for his beauty. And by all accounts, he was exceptionally beautiful. That beauty would become his curse. Sometime after Poppaea's death, Nero's obsessive gaze fell on Sporus. What he saw shocked him. The historian Cassius Dio writes that Sporus had an uncanny resemblance to the dead empress. We'll never know if the similarity was truly that striking or if it was just a projection of the emperor's broken mind. For Nero, it didn't matter. In Sporus's face, he saw a ghost. He saw a chance to stage a resurrection. The emperor's fixation was immediate. He brought Sporus to him and began a monstrous project. The psychological torture started long before the physical. Sporus was reportedly made to dress in the fine silks of the late empress. He was taught to walk, talk, and move not as himself, but as a woman, as Poppaea. Every moment was a lesson in erasing who he was. Imagine the terror of being forced to mimic a dead woman, where every natural impulse is corrected, and your own personality is buried under layers of imitation. Nero wasn't looking for a new favorite who just reminded him of Poppaea. He wanted to create a perfect copy. He saw Sporus not as a person, but as clay to be molded. His original name is lost, and it's believed Sporus, from the Greek word for seed, was a cruel nickname given to him, possibly after his castration. The uncanny resemblance was just the start. Nero's vision demanded a more permanent, brutal change. If Sporus was going to truly become his new empress, his male identity had to be destroyed. The grotesque transformation. The emperor's command was absolute. Nero ordered that Sporus be made into a woman. With the medical technology of the 1st century AD being what it was, he settled for the most brutal method available: castration. This wasn't just mutilation, it was the final act of identity theft. By having Sporus castrated, Nero permanently altered the boy's body, turning him into a eunuch who existed outside of Rome's traditional gender roles. The procedure would have been horrific, and surviving it was a testament only to his value to the emperor's fantasy. He was too precious an object to be allowed to die. With that done, Nero moved to the next phase: a wedding. This wasn't a private ceremony, it was a grand, public spectacle that violated every social and religious custom in Rome. Suetonius records that the wedding had all the usual ceremonies, including a dowry and a bridal veil. Tigellinus, Nero's infamous Praetorian prefect, even played the role of the bride's father, giving Sporus away. Sporus was given a new name: Sabina. He was now to be addressed by the name of the dead empress. He was dressed in Poppaea's gowns and jewels. A court official named Calvia Crispinilla was put in charge of her wardrobe, though her exact role in this affair isn't fully detailed in the historical records. Nero paraded his Sabina across Greece, kissing her in public and demanding that everyone treat her like an empress. The Roman people were horrified. One citizen was quoted by Suetonius, remarking that it would have been better for the world if Nero's own father had married such a bride. The comment reflects the dark, cynical disgust many felt. They saw it as an abomination, a sign of Nero's total contempt for Roman values. For Sporus, the ceremony was the final confirmation that his old self was dead. In the eyes of the empire, he was now Nero's wife. The living doll life as the Empress Sabina was a performance that never ended. Sporus was trapped, not a man, not a woman, not a slave, but not free. He was a living doll in a prison of unimaginable psychological torment, all dependent on the whims of a madman. Nero's treatment of Sporus was a terrifying cycle. One moment he would shower Sabina with the same affection and gifts he once gave Poppaea. The next, he would fly into a rage if Sporus failed to perfectly channel the ghost of his dead wife. A gesture that was too masculine, a word spoken in the wrong tone. Any slip-up could bring on the emperor's wrath. Sporus was being punished for failing to be someone else. Publicly, he was a trophy. Nero took him everywhere, forcing the Roman elite, senators and courtiers, to play along. They had to call him lady and empress. They bowed to the mutilated youth wearing a dead woman's clothes, their forced complicity another show of Nero's power to bend reality itself. Behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. Sporus had to learn the intimate details of a life he never lived. Poppaea's private jokes, her habits, how she would have responded to Nero's moods. He was living in a dead woman's shadow, every breath a careful imitation. Palace servants whispered of seeing him standing alone in the gardens, completely still, as if he'd forgotten how to exist when he wasn't playing a part. There was no escape. How could he run? His altered body and public role made him one of the most recognizable figures in the empire. He was a prisoner in a gilded cage, The fall of the tyrant. By 68 AD, the Roman Empire had had enough of Nero. His wild spending and tyranny had bred resentment everywhere. Rebellions broke out, and the Senate, finally seizing its chance, declared Nero a public enemy and sentenced him to death. The emperor was now a fugitive. As Nero fled Rome in the middle of the night, he had only a few loyal followers with him. And by his side was Sporus. In his final pathetic hours, the terrified emperor turned to his living doll, his Sabina, for comfort. Suetonius notes that Nero began to weep, and he begged Sporus to begin the lamentations for him. Even at the very end, as his world burned, Nero clung to the fantasy. Sporus, who was forced into this role, was now expected to play the grieving wife for the very man who had destroyed him. Hiding in a villa outside the city, Nero couldn't bring himself to end his own life. Crying, "What an artist dies in me." He hesitated until he heard soldiers approaching. He then forced his private secretary to help him drive a dagger into his throat. The tyrant was dead. For Rome, it marked the end of a dynasty. But for Sporus, the death of his tormentor wasn't freedom. It was just the start of the next chapter of his tragedy. The tragic aftermath. In the chaos after Nero's death, Sporus was immediately claimed as a spoil of war. He was taken in by the Praetorian prefect Nymphidius Sabinus, who had conspired against Nero. Nymphidius treated Sporus as his own consort, continuing to call him Poppaea and forcing him to remain in his horrifying role. But Nymphidius's own grab for power failed, and he was quickly killed by his own soldiers. Sporus was passed on again, this time to Otho, who briefly became emperor in 69 AD. In a grim twist of fate, Otho had been Poppaea Sabina's first husband before Nero forced them to divorce. Now, Otho was in possession of the boy who had been mutilated to replace her. For Sporus, it was just a new master who saw him as a prize. Otho's reign lasted only 3 months before he was defeated by his rival Vitellius. For Sporus, this was the final, horrifying turn. Vitellius had no interest in keeping up Nero's charade. Instead, he planned a new kind of public spectacle. He was going to force Sporus to play the lead role in a play at a gladiatorial show, The Rape of Proserpina, a myth about a maiden goddess dragged into the underworld to be a bride. The story was a chilling mirror of Sporus's own life. He was to be publicly violated, his trauma turned into entertainment for the masses. Faced with this final, unbearable humiliation, the youth who had endured so much made his first and last true act of defiance. Rather than submit, Sporus took his own life. He was likely not even 20 years old. In death, he finally reclaimed the control that had been so brutally stolen from him. It was the only escape from a nightmare that had started with nothing more than an unfortunate resemblance. The story of Sporus is a chilling, personal tragedy, but it's also a dark stain on the society that let it happen. It shows the terrifying endpoint of absolute power, where one unhinged man's delusions can destroy another person's reality. Nero's court and the Roman elite became silent partners in the erasure of a human being. They watched as a youth was mutilated and forced into a grotesque performance, their silence a testament to the poison of tyranny. Sporus's life is a haunting question about identity. He wasn't just abused, he was unmade. His name, his body, and his spirit were all sacrificed for a fantasy. The real Sporus is lost to us. His voice is silent, his true feelings only visible through the lens of historians who recorded his fate as a scandalous footnote in the reign of a mad emperor. Yet, in that final act, there's a spark of rebellion. By choosing death over one last public degradation, Sporus made a final, desperate claim to his own existence. His story is a dark mirror held up to the grandeur of Rome, reflecting the rot that can fester just beneath the surface. It's a timeless and disturbing reminder that the greatest horrors are often found not in war, but in the quiet, methodical destruction of a single human soul. If you found this dive into one of history's darkest chapters compelling, please consider subscribing for more stories from the past. Like this video if it gave you a new perspective, and share your thoughts on the story of Sporus in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring these important and often forgotten histories to light. Thanks for watching.